Hey guys, Paul here. So, I've been wondering something. Should Konami unban Pot of Greed? Now wait, I know what you're probably thinking, and it's not actually that. This actually has nothing to do with whether or not Pot of Greed could come back in the modern game, or if it would be balanced or unbalanced, or whether or not it would ruin things, but actually about something a little bit different entirely. It's about Yu-Gi-Oh's popularity. So, hear me out. When Yu-Gi-Oh gets a big mainstream moment in kind of the limelight, that's a pretty big deal because it doesn't happen often. Yu-Gi-Oh is a very niche game and property at this point, I would say. There are a lot of people who have nostalgic memories of Yu-Gi-Oh, and there are a lot of people who certainly know of its existence. You know, they watched the TV show, maybe they played a long time ago. But oftentimes, Yu-Gi-Oh is a bit of a niche, right? If you tell somebody about the Rescue Ace deck, for instance, right, or the Snake Eye deck, they're going to have no clue what you're talking about. Nobody knows what Fallen Valbaz is, but plenty of people know what Blue Eyes and Dark Magician are. All right, also, the goal for Konami, I think, is to make as much money as possible and kind of convert new Yu-Gi-Oh players. How exactly they do that, lots of different ways. There's a lot of like DM or nostalgia kind of pandering GX, DM characters, things like that. And also, there are different sort of accessibility products. We've got like those new starter decks that are supposed to be coming out. Really interested in seeing exactly how that goes. But more than anything, I guess I find myself thinking, what are the big moments that really like push Yu-Gi-Oh into the mainstream? And there've been a few of them in the past year, or really past 2 years, let's say. So the first big one was probably the release of Master Duel. I can't actually overstate just how big of a deal Master Duel's release was. When Master Duel came out, it was, broke Steam sales records and stuff, and at least within the card game category and stuff like that. There were a lot of mainstream gaming news outlets reporting on it. Loads of new content creators showed up. Lots of people just wanted to hop on Master Duel. I had real life friends who I didn't even know were like interested in Yu-Gi-Oh who downloaded Master Duel and told me about it, and they were like, "Oh yeah, like I saw this Master Duel game. I decided to give it a try. It was pretty cool." So, all eyes were on Yu-Gi-Oh! And in a lot of ways, I feel like Konami kind of fumbled it a little bit. Like, I feel like they could have done more to push it as, a bit of an esport and that sort of thing, but it's a different conversation for a different video. Also, though, the two other really big moments in the last couple years were the unbanning of Change of Heart, which happened in like, what was it, May or so of 2022? But yeah, Change of Heart came unbanned, came off the list, and this was a huge deal, right? Not because the card actually ended up seeing loads and loads of play. Now, granted, it does see some competitive play, but more just because of what it represented. The fact that, this really, really iconic old Yu-Gi-Oh card that is just seen as so broken, right, to the average person, right, someone who doesn't really follow competitive Yu-Gi-Oh, Change of Heart, one of those just iconic old nostalgic things. It was in every deck you built. And it came back, and that was just a really big deal. I remember it was trending on Twitter, random news outlets were talking about it, and more than just comic book resources. But it was a pretty cool thing. Yu-Gi-Oh was kind of relevant for a day or two. People were just talking about this. And then the most recent one would probably be the Jeff Leonard Exodia FTK on stream thing, right? So that little video getting shared was a really big deal because it trended once again. Some news outlets covered it once again. A lot of people who had nostalgic memories of Yu-Gi-Oh were like, whoa, it's so cool seeing like somebody doing Exodia in 2023 and it like happening on stream at a tournament against all the crazy, toxic, wild meta decks that exist these days. And so it kind of got me to thinking, if Yu-Gi-Oh wants to grow, and I'm not saying that that should necessarily be the number one priority, but if we assume that Yu-Gi-Oh wants to grow, Konami wants the game to kind of get more mainstream attention and appeal, then a really good way of doing that is kind of reaching for nostalgic things. And I thought, well, what is a card that's sort of similar to Change of Heart that could come off the ban list that would probably make some pretty big waves in just a mainstream gaming space? And that's kind of where Pot of Greed came to mind. Now, you have to remember for a second that I'm not so much talking about the balance of Pot of Greed. In fact, my personal opinion is that Pot of Greed should not come off the ban list. I think that, any card that just goes 1 for 2 is obviously very good, and the value of just getting singular cards these days in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is astronomically high. It's why we kind of, in my opinion, are seeing more of a crackdown on even the newer pot cards. Some people want Pot of Prosperity banned. There are competitive players who want that. There are people, like in Master Duel, for instance, they've been like limiting all the pot cards. I think that Pot of Greed probably just should not come back. That's just my opinion, but the point is, though, I think that if it did come back, it would be a really big moment because a lot of, old heads would suddenly be like, whoa, Pot of Greed's back? Maybe I should try out Yu-Gi-Oh again. You could also even like time this with some other strategic releases like, oh, a new Yugi Kaiba deck or a Yu-Gi-Oh anime reboot or whatever. And like suddenly, you've got kind of Yu-Gi-Oh in the mainstream again. And so the point that I'm making with the video is not really whether or not Pot of Greed should come back from a competitive integrity standpoint. I think it shouldn't. But should Pot of Greed, or perhaps another card, come back in a way that is meant to kind of make Yu-Gi-Oh! Popular again, give it a mainstream sort of spotlight moment? Now, I was thinking too, maybe it's not necessarily that Pot of Greed has to come back into the modern advanced format. Maybe this is where your other alternative Yu-Gi-Oh format thing kind of comes up instead, right? Yu-Gi-Oh used to have a thing called, what was it, traditional format, where all the cards that were banned were instead at 1. And that was an actual legitimate way to play. I remember playing this at Books A Million as a kid. It was a pretty cool thing. So, maybe Pot of Greed coming back or something like that, or just the return of a format like that could do a similar thing. But I still think that it kind of would take that one big moment of Pot of Greed itself being on the Forbidden and Limited list, and then like suddenly being off it, or being at 1 at least, that would really do, the big thing, right? That's at least kind of how I read it. Now, are there other cards that could certainly serve the same purpose? Sort of, kind of. I mean, they sort of ruined the opportunity when it came to like Chaos Emperor Dragon or Brain Control, because they errated them and they just aren't really useful anymore. Same with like Crush Card Virus. I mean, I guess if you wanted to, you could do something with like Fiber Jar or Magical Scientist, right? If you wanted to bring those off the ban list. Not saying they should. I think Fiber Jar causes maybe too many tournament problems, like with rulings and stuff. And Magical Scientist just straight up would have to get some kind of an errata. I just don't see it being able to really exist in a healthy way. But I guess my main question is, is there a way that Yu-Gi-Oh! Could kind of reach into the mainstream again, and what card would it be that could come off the ban list that could do it? And if it's not a ban list thing, then we could broaden the conversation to just more general topics, right? Does Yu-Gi-Oh! Need a new video game? Should Yu-Gi-Oh! Get a new movie? Should there be an anime reboot? A lot of people talk about that as like a potential thing. Obviously, there's issues maybe in terms of integrity, right? The passing of Kazuki Takahashi might make it both ethically and probably legally really difficult to like have a new Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime reboot. But I've just been seeing so many, like, One Piece or Rurouni Kenshin or like Bleach sort of technically like are getting like these reboots and stuff. And so I feel like maybe it could be Yu-Gi-Oh's turn. Or would it maybe just be, I don't know, Yu-Gi-Oh! Getting a skin in Fortnite? Would that be, enough? I think that that would certainly, surge the interest into the mainstream. You still need to have like a lot of kids and younger people kind of interested in Yu-Gi-Oh! And stuff again. So anyways, moral of the story, should Pot of Greed be unbanned? Not so much for its, balance or competitive power or whatever, but for what it might do for Yu-Gi-Oh! As a whole. I would love to hear what you guys think about that down in the comments, because it's just something that's kind of a fun thought experiment. Like, should we compromise the health and integrity of the competitive TCG for the sake of growing the Yu-Gi-Oh! Brand is ultimately what I'm asking. I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts down below. I'll see you guys in the next one. Pass turn.